comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Angela Rayner is preparing to scrap one of Thatcher's great legacies, the right to buy scheme. Socialists will always climb up the ladder and pull it up after themselves. It's a shock result in the first round of the Tory leadership election, with the former Home Secretary, Dame Priti Patel, being eliminated from the race. For those of you anxious to hear my views on the Oasis ticket saga, tonight I will be exclusively breaking my silence on the dynamic pricing controversy. Plus, yet another example of going woke, going broke. The National Trust has seen a slump in membership following its relentless campaign of Britain bashing and self-flagellation. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my panel tonight. A battle of the historians is upon us. David Oldroyd-Bolt of the Danube Institute and State of the Nation regular Tessa Dunlop. As ever, I want to know your views. It's a crucial part of the programme, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite part of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 8 o'clock. Your headlines. The Grenfell Tower fire, which killed 72 people, was the result of decades of failure. That's according to a long-awaited report. Over almost 1,700 pages, the Grenfell report reveals how missed opportunities by the government, building companies, contractors and council staff turned Grenfell into a death trap. Families and survivors of the deadly blaze 7 years ago say today's final damning report shows they were failed by calculated dishonesty and greed. Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government official Rashanari Ali said the blame lies with the previous government.
The report sets out that successive governments have failed to provide the protection and tackle this issue. And so what's absolutely crucial is that we make sure that buildings that are unsafe, the remediation work happens speedily. It hasn't happened fast enough. People are living in unsafe buildings and they need these buildings to be remediated.
And Rishi Sunak, now leader of the opposition, has attacked Labour's move to axe the winter fuel allowance for millions of pensioners. He faced off with Sir Keir Starmer at the first Prime Minister's questions since Parliament returned from summer recess. The Conservative leader accused the Prime Minister of taking money from low-income pensioners and ploughing it into inflation-busting pay rises for union workers. However, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer defended his decision to cut the winter fuel payments, saying it's essential to stabilise the economy. Now, Priti Patel has become the first Tory MP to be voted out of the party's leadership contest, with only 14 votes from 121 Tory MPs. Meanwhile, Robert Jenrick came top of the ballot with 28 votes. MPs cast their opening votes this afternoon, reducing the number of candidates from 6 to 5. The contenders now include James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick, Tom Tugendhat, Mel Stride and Kemi Badenoch. It's understood 4 people have died and 30 have been injured after a shooting at a high school in Georgia in the US. These are pictures of Appalachia High School in Barrow County, which was put on lockdown this morning after reports of gunfire there. Georgia State Police say one person is in custody after the shooting. The White House has now been briefed on the incident. And Oasis have added 2 new dates for Wembley in 2025 after their tour sold out over the weekend. The band said tickets will be sold by a staggered invitation-only ballot process. Applications to join the ballot will be opened first to many UK fans who were unsuccessful with the initial sale with Ticketmaster, and they're saying more details will follow. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Over time, socialists changed the badges on their lapels, their slogans, their colours and their flags. But one thing always remains the same. They climb up the ladder, but once they've reached the top, they pull it up after themselves. The latest example is, of course, Angela Rayner, the Housing Secretary, who infamously benefited from Lady Thatcher's policy of the right to buy. Ms Rayner is now reportedly drawing up plans to abandon the policy, so you can't. The right to buy policy embodies everything that is great about conservatism: the belief in social and economic mobility, the belief in home ownership, in wealth creation and prosperity. The policy gets to the heart of the distinction between conservatives and socialists. Conservatives want to create a pathway to prosperity, while socialists want to keep poor people poor in the hope that they will be a captive vote. The proposed move to cancel the right to buy scheme comes from concerns that the council houses sold enter the private market, but they don't stop being houses. A report early this year from the left-wing New Economics Foundation lamented the fact that 40% of former council house homes sold under the scheme are now owned by private landlords. Quelle horror! But socialists also don't understand basic supply and demand. Property being in the private sector is a good thing. The housing crisis is caused by a lack of supply. We haven't built enough homes. More homes enter the rental market. This actually reduces rents and makes them more affordable. But this move also marks a signal that we're not witnessing the resurrection of new Labour, but rather old Labour, Jim Callaghan's Labour. And here is a glorious moment from the Thatcher years when she was up against old Labour.
Will the Prime Minister take time this afternoon to consider the plight of the hundreds of thousands of council tenants who've been encouraged by this government to buy their council house?
Mr Speaker, as the honourable gentleman is very well aware, we put through a policy of purchasing council houses by their tenants, a policy which was bitterly opposed by the Labour Party, a policy from which many, many people have profited and are very grateful.
For Angela Rayner, the right to buy scheme meant buying her own home and improving her financial circumstances, but it seems such a policy will no longer be afforded to people living in council houses. Up the ladder for Ms Rayner, but it's only snakes for you. As ever, let me know your views on mailmog@gbnews.com. With me now is a friend of the programme and former Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle, as well as my panel of two historians, David Oldroyd-Bolt and Tessa Dunlop. Lloyd, thank you very much for coming in. This is classic socialism, isn't it? Take away opportunity from people, make them do what the state says. State control of people's lives is a good thing.
No. I mean, first of all, let's be clear, a council home is a home for life. It's a permanent home for that individual. And at the moment, we have a crisis not just of housing, but housing tenure. We have the same number of bedrooms per head of population as we did in 1978. But what we don't have is the right tenure. If you look at the tenure, we have far too many private rented houses where people have to move every year. It gives instability to children. It gives instability for work. It doesn't allow communities to flourish. And we don't have enough council homes. And the problem is the quicker that you build the council homes, they get sold off. And they get sold off and only about a third goes to the council and the rest, the Treasury pockets into their black hole. So something needs to change. Now, there does need to be a pathway to permanence. And even before the right to buy from Thatcher, there was a pathway to permanence where people could own their homes, but without the big discounts and without some of the other disadvantages to communities.
But isn't the real underlying issue that our planning system has stopped housing being built, and that what you need is a diversity of supply? Private renting is not in and of itself a bad thing. Short-term tenure is not in and of itself a bad thing. It allows flexibility of the workforce. It allows people to move to jobs more easily. It allows people to try something out, thinking, well, we might go here without the full investment of buying something new or the application for a council house. And it's the shortage of properties that is at the heart of this.
Well, I think that you are treating it as one market. And I'm afraid it's not one market at the moment. There is a third, maybe even half of the market that is perfectly satisfactory. It works well. People use it to move around. Students use it to go to university temporarily. And I think everyone would be foolish to start to try and fiddle about with the private rented sector there. But there is about about half, maybe a bit more, that is at the moment effectively social housing. It is private rented property where they are paying it via a state subsidy of universal credit and housing benefit. So it's state money that is going straight to the landlords, whereas there's no security of what that quality of housing is. There's no security that councils are able to develop. And the problem with right to buy, which is the bit that we're talking about, is that if I'm a council and I go to a private investor or a bank or finance mechanisms, which councils are entitled to do, and say I want to build X number of houses, without giving the security that I will get this amount of life of rent or I will be able to sell it for this amount, councils are in a disadvantage to developers, whereas developers, of course, can say, well, I will sell it at this amount or I will rent it out at this amount. Councils don't know because they don't know when the right to buy person will come knocking and it will be taken off their hands at a huge discount.
On the issue of housing benefit paying for tenancies, that certainly happens a lot for social housing, but actually there's been a lot of criticism of private landlords that they don't want tenants who are in receipt of housing benefit because they are less likely to be able to pay any rent increase and so on and so forth. So it's not that group of people, that is particularly affected by this.
Well, that group of people are in private rented properties because they aren't eligible for council housing. When the first council housing was built, it wasn't for poor people.
Oh, indeed,
it was actually
right.
for working people. It would be. I've seen if you look at the records of some of the first council housing in Brighton, you had to get a reference from the local butcher and the local baker, from your employer. You had to prove that you were good standing, and that has gone because we don't have enough council housing.
That went years ago.
Because we don't have enough council housing, and that's why we need
the right to buy.
We need to build the council housing.
As a constituency MP, you and I both found that the only people who could get onto the council housing list were people whose circumstances were absolutely desperate. Yes, there was no chance for people who were working but weren't well off.
And that's what slowly needs to change. And it's a mountain. It's not going to change overnight. But you cannot start building if you've got the plug hole unplugged and you're draining out the stock. I think you need a temporary measure to stop it. You then need to review how you get permanence, i.e., for example, someone can buy it, but they have to offer it back to the council in the long term, and then eventually you re-stabilise the market.
David, there seems to be a fundamental fallacy in the people who object to council house sales. It assumes the houses no longer exist. But they're still there. They're lived in by the people who are living in them as council house tenants. And lots of them carry on living there for years. They don't all sell up immediately.
Well, as should be a possibility under the system. I want to address one thing that that Lloyd said. You said that we still have bedroom occupancy as 1978. Well, that's because since 1997 we've added 10 million people to the population, as well as not building enough houses. So you end up with a nexus of falling supply and immensely increased demand. And when many of those immigrants are coming here with dependents and are therefore not able to access the already enormously undersupplied private market, they fall onto the largesse of the state.
In 1978, we were able to accommodate most of our people.
Because we hadn't imported another sixth of the population in 25 years. Even though per head of population we have the same amount of bedrooms. The problem is not the bedrooms and buildings per se, it's the tenure. It's where those bedrooms are. It is the style of those bedrooms. That's the problem.
Tessa, you're desperate to get a word in edgeways.
Funnily enough, I wasn't. I was enjoying listening to these fiery redheads that surround me this evening. I think... I remember, in fact, because we grew up in a tied house, so my father's job came with the house. And my mother really struggled for many decades not owning her own property. And the great joy to her when he died and she moved on into her own home, there's this it was a thrill. Even now, she's sort of constantly changing and upgrading or downsizing. And it is really important. It's attached to the sort of the idea of the freedom of the self almost must be that we're pinned down by bricks and mortar. So I think that should be a privilege available to anybody who's earning honestly and reasonably. However, we do have a housing crisis, and I don't understand why we can't just all meet in the middle and identify a great big British compromise that we temporarily suspend right to buy, or we much lower the discount, which is what New Labour did. You've accused these boys of old Labour. New Labour just lowered it twice.
But it seems to me that all these things are excuses for not building more houses. So the Tories were...
It's a given we're building. That's why they won the election. Build back better. That was Labour's whole...
They say that, but they've done nothing about the Nutrients Directive, which makes it almost impossible to build. There are so many obstructions to building. So everyone says we want to build more. We said we want to build more. They say they want to build more. But people are failing to do this. And then they say, well, the housing problem is caused by private landlords. It's caused by right to buy. It's caused by immigration. It may be affected by these things, but the fundamental problem is we're just not building enough houses for the population that we've got.
I think there's one other slight PR problem. They've got, and you pointed it out, the wrong woman as minister overseeing this. I think that's a massive gaffe. The do as I say, don't do as I do, etc. And I can't understand why, if they knew that this was coming down the line, Angela Rayner was given that gig. It just seems to me an extraordinary mismatch.
I think that it's slightly dangerous if we constantly say to politicians, you can't have done something illegally in the past, that then you can't legislate to make it illegal. I smoked as a young man, not very often, but occasionally in pubs.
Weed or cigarettes?
Cigarettes.
We're not getting admissions.
Cigarettes. But I fully support the idea that inside pubs, and I'm being very clear on the inside bit, that it was right to ban it. And I would have supported that in any vote. Just because I did it in the past doesn't mean that I can't look back and say...
You didn't gain financial advantage and property by smoking in a pub.
All right.
Also, she trended on this subject for months.
This has set a cat amongst the pigeons, so thank you to Lloyd and my panel. In a moment, we'll be having a look at how Ed Miliband energy policies could cost you yet another £150 a year, plus a shock result in the Tory party leadership election as Dame Priti Patel is eliminated in the first round.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
An army veteran has become the world's most tattooed woman after a 10-year journey to ink 99.98% of her body. I mean, that's really nearly everywhere. But I wonder, I mean, yes, she is unusual, and you'd know her if you met her, frankly, wouldn't you? But are tattoos acceptable they're becoming more and more acceptable just amongst all of us, aren't they? But what about in the workplace?
99.98% of her body tattooed. Do you think this would affect the way that she is received at work?
I do affect it would how she is seen at work, just purely because tattoos are still so stigmatised in the workplace. In today's rapidly evolving society, the traditional standards of what is socially acceptable are being redefined. Facial tattoos, full body tattoos, once stigmatised, are increasingly seen as a form of personal expression, and there shouldn't be a barrier to one's professional or social life.
If you are going for a job, for instance, we make up 90% of our minds about somebody within the first 3 seconds. And I have written a book on body language, and the face is just so important. You need to have the smile, you need to be able to read the facial expression, even when we're speaking. Now, if the face is really heavily tattooed, you can't do that.
Jade said that there is still this stigma, particularly to facial tattoos. We do judge people with tattoos, don't we?
We do. Unfortunately, we do, because it's not the norm. And as a human being, we tend to judge what is not the norm. And as Jade says, we are getting much more used to it. It is much more socially acceptable. But a lot of firms will say, if you've got a tattoo, you cover it. We don't want tattoos in the workplace.
GB News, the People's Channel. I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about the right to buy, and the male Moggs have come in. Robert says the champagne socialists are in control, and the hypocritical Rayner is at the front. Business as usual. Blair is the figurehead. And Jane says, do you agree that we not only have a housing crisis, but a social housing crisis too? Jane, yes, I do, broadly. But we need to build more. That's the question. And Alex, do you have faith in Rayner as Housing Secretary? Well, what matters, I'm afraid, is whether Sir Keir Starmer has faith in her, not whether an old Tory like me has confidence in her. It's reached the point that I would not be surprised to learn that Ed Miliband has Dutch ancestry. Such is his fondness for windmills, and sometimes tilting at them. The Secretary for Energy Security has announced a scheme to build more of the turbines that will cost each household as much as £150. In an apparent dereliction of Labour's election pledge to support working people, houses will be squeezed in order to pay for the plans set to cost £3 billion. This comes as Offshore Energies UK warned that Labour's planned increase in the energy windfall tax would cost the UK economy £13 billion and threaten 35,000 jobs earlier this week. Well, I'm joined now by environmental lawyer and campaigner for Defend Our Juries, Tim Crossland. Tim, thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
I know the Conservatives had an auction round which failed, and it failed because the price that was set was a low price. But this has now offered much bigger subsidies, which ultimately all fall on consumers. Is this the right thing to be doing at the moment?
I just want to begin with a point of accuracy, because I think part of what we're seeing today is some Labour politicians congratulating themselves on the success of this auction, and some sections of the media going, well, look at this thing that they have done. As I understand it, actually, the uplifted minimum price was set by the previous government before the general election. So I think it's good to get a bit of just sort of clarity about that point and what's actually happened here, because, as you say, that first round had failed.
Had failed, but to be fair to the new Labour government, they've scrapped quite a lot of things that the Tories were doing, including freedom of speech in universities. So I think things that they do on their watch, they are entitled to take responsibility for.
Sure. Well, I think that's true as well.
And I'd probably be asking about this if it was still a Tory government, saying it was ridiculously extravagant.
Exactly, but just for the context. And I would certainly agree that we don't want to see people who are already struggling with the cost of living crisis burdened more than they already are. I also think it's true, as a point of accuracy, that the government itself contests that figure of £150 per household, so I'm not sure that is accepted, but I understand that it's out there. I think there are two parts of the question that are raised here. First, do we need more onshore and offshore wind? And this is offshore wind, this auction round. And I think the answer to that is definitely we do, because whatever you think about oil and gas, the North Sea oil and gas, those fields are deeply depleted. What little is left, actually, it's the wrong kind of oil for our refineries, and it has to be exported anyway. So we desperately need our own renewable sources of energy.
Yeah, but we have got shale gas if we wanted to exploit it, which we've singularly failed to do. So there's an opportunity to get enormous quantities of gas if we wanted to. And some of these renewables are very expensive. The floating wind is £195 per megawatt hour. Now, that I think compares with the US, which is able, with its shale gas, to produce electricity at $35 per megawatt hour.
Well, there's an international consensus. It's not just the last Conservative government that decided fracking was unsafe and therefore put a stop to it. It's governments around the world that have come to that same conclusion. There's also an extraordinary figure, and I'm not going to pretend I fully understand it, but the IMF has said fossil fuels are subsidised at $5 trillion a year in 2022. So the thought that it is only renewables that involve subsidies, it's just not correct.
The discussions you get on subsidies for fossil fuels are essentially bogus. People say that the ability of the oil companies that have explored the North Sea to get offsets when they decommission is a subsidy. Any business gets offsets on its business expenses. This is completely routine tax law. Subsidies in normal language are when you are paying a specific benefit for a specific means of production. So I would strongly contest this figure of subsidies for fossil fuels.
I think the figures are contested, but there are substantial subsidies involved on most analyses. I think the other question it could come back to is, why are we in this situation where we're having to race at such speed with this energy transition, which does impose sort of unnatural costs? And part of the answer to that, and it feels very sort of poignant today when we get the report about Grenfell and the talk of the systematic concealment by corporations around the cladding, and we think not very long ago, I think we mentioned Fujitsu and the post office scandal, this systematic concealment of material that could hurt corporate profits. Well, back in 1980, when the fossil fuel companies get together, and we've got the minutes of that meeting, and it says, we carry on in this way, it's global catastrophe by the middle of this century, and they decide to suppress that information for the same reason that Fujitsu does, for the same reason that Arconic does, and that's what's left us in this situation.
The global catastrophe seems to be significantly overstated, that there are changes in the temperature, everybody accepts that. But the question is it better to ameliorate the consequences or try rapidly to stop the cause? And it seems to me in trying to stop the cause, we are doing things that are uneconomic and that people won't in the end vote for, so they won't happen.
Well, if evidence has been concealed from the public and the public don't know what the true situation is, we're not in a very democratic position.
No, look, I'm not in favour of big business hiding things. Of course I'm not. But I think one has to be very careful about these arguments for urgent action, because we were told it was very important to have diesel cars because it was better for the environment. This was untrue. It was wrong by government and wrong by business. And that, therefore, all these things are much best left to market forces, and that cheap energy is essential to economic growth and for the standard of living of the least well-off in society.
Well, which is exactly why we need offshore wind and onshore wind, which is one of the resources we have in this country. And part of this is getting away from dependency on autocratic regimes. In Russia, the Middle East, we don't have oil and gas.
That's why I wanted fracking. But anyway, thank you as always, Tim. In a moment, we'll be looking at the shock upset at the Tory leadership contest, with Priti Patel being eliminated in the first round of voting. Plus, you'll be waiting for this on bated breath. I'll be exclusively breaking my silence on the Oasis ticket pricing saga.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. We're at the start of a pretty wet period across southern areas, with a warning in force all the way through until the end of Friday. But it will remain quite dry actually across north and western areas. We've got high pressure starting to build in from the north and west. We will develop an easterly wind, however, so that's going to drag in some cloud across eastern areas of Scotland, northeastern England as well overnight tonight. Further north and west though, staying dry and clear across Northern Ireland and western areas of Scotland, as well as some northwestern areas of Wales. Into the south though, some outbreaks of very heavy rain starting to develop, and we do have that warning in force. So potentially a bit of a fresh start to the day across the northwestern areas of Scotland, but it's across the south with plenty of cloud around and outbreaks of heavy rain. We could see some travel disruption where we have got that warning in force. Not everywhere is going to see the rain all day, but where you do see it is likely to bring some surface water. Could be quite a murky start to the day across eastern areas of Scotland as well as northeastern England, but plenty of sunshine across Northern Ireland, the Western Highlands as well as the islands throughout Thursday, and it will feel quite warm in that sunshine with light winds. Much better weather than we've had lately across these areas, and in fact temperatures could climb higher than they have done since May by Friday across parts of the northwest. Very different story though in the south, with outbreaks of heavy rain developing. It's most likely to turn quite heavy across southwestern areas of England, South Wales as well. So pretty dull day across the south, but quite a big difference from the northwest. And a similar day to come on Friday. Further outbreaks of rain across the south, so we'd like to see further flooding issues and surface water. Easterly wind will continue to bring some cloud to the coast of the northeast, but it will burn back a little more, so there will be more in the way of sunshine on Friday, more widely in northern areas. Another fine day to come Saturday and Sunday in the north, with further outbreaks of heavy rain across southern areas. Bye-bye.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, the first round of votes are in and the contest looks wider than the political spectrum at a Labour Party conference. Robert Jenrick came first with 28 votes, followed by Kemi Badenoch on 22. Dame Priti Patel has been knocked out on 14. A big surprise, only 6 votes separated second place and fifth place. The field is completely open, and if anyone were to receive all of Dame Priti's votes, he or she would be propelled into first place. Closeness of the results will certainly stir things up, and we will know who is next to be eliminated on Tuesday. And I'm joined now by the battle of historians, David Aldroyd-Bolt and Tessa Dunlop. David, I'll come to you first. This isn't really what was expected. I think people were thinking there would be 2 clear front-runners, Jenrick and Badenoch, and that Mel Stride would be knocked out. So this really has opened it up.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it, that there is also only 1 vote between Colonel Tugendhat and Mr Stride. Incidentally, I'm rather enjoying it. It's like the 1950s. You've got 2 colonels in the running for Tory leadership and a dame being knocked out. Back to a better time. No, I think that the expectation was that Mr Jenrick and Mrs Badenoch would be ahead. I rather thought that the votes between them would be narrower, and I must admit I thought that Tugendhat would be in third place. I think perhaps Mel Stride's, as it were, dark horse candidacy is giving the left of the Tory party someone else to consider. I can't say I expect him to go any farther than this. I suspect that the votes for Dame Priti will go pretty much evenly between Mrs Badenoch, Mr Jenrick, and that Mr Stride's voters will now, having given him a bit of a run, switch probably to Colonel Tugendhat.
It is quite interesting, isn't it, that, I mean, you'd imagine Dame Priti's votes will go to a right-wing candidate, so therefore Jenrick or Cleverly.
Cleverly?
Cleverly used to be on the right, whether he still is. But Mel Stride has done so well that people who may have thought about not voting for him because he couldn't do very well may be tempted to give him a go.
Sort of steady hand on the tiller. I'm just going to break it to you guys that in the normal world, which I don't know if either of you occupy, people actually can't tell the difference between Robert Jenrick and Tom Tugendhat. They think they sometimes get them confused. If you say to them, who are these 2 people? They don't know. The only name recognition individual, though, is Priti Patel. She's now out, interestingly. And it's
surely they know Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, she's maybe the one exception. Some of them might know her for her wacky views on gender, but I don't think they would have much of a steer on what she stood for or where she was about. And extraordinarily, even if people got excited by this, highly unlikely, the one big political performance before the end of the year is the budget, and they're not going to be elected in time for that showdown. And Rishi seems to have taken a part-time holiday constantly in California. It seems to me like, given that the Labour Party is not really having such an
Rishi, to be fair to Rishi, he was pretty hot stuff. Pretty good hot mustard at Prime Minister's Questions today when he duffed up Keir Starmer over...
Well, he's so well rested, I'm not surprised,
over stealing from the poor pensioners. And Starmer had no answer, just flannelled around and kept on calling Sunak the Prime Minister.
It's weird, because I could have just answered...
It's a bit dopey when you're the Prime Minister, is it?
It was a bit dopey, and also he could have just said, well, triple lock that means that they're going to get a £400 hike by the end of the year anyway, the pensioners, and that wipes out, you know, the impact of the pension loss. If I had been Keir Starmer, I might have said something like that. But, you know, I suspect he's very overtired, and he hasn't taken a holiday. He doesn't have a third home in California, I believe. Keir Starmer. It wouldn't be really in keeping with the Labour Party ethos, would it?
No, it would be Tuscany instead.
But who do we think will win? I thought Cleverly might sort of creep through just by boring everyone to death eventually.
Well, James's result is very respectable, isn't it?
I think he's the candidate for the broad mass of the Tory party that is neither particularly to the left nor to the right, and want someone whom they know is a decent hand in government, someone who's got a long record of service, someone who does very well on television and at the dispatch box.
He's not the sharpest knife in the box, though, is he? He's not...
I shouldn't cast aspersions about his intellect either way, but I think he's been an extremely good parliamentary performer. I think he's been, in an age of internecine fighting of the party, he's been conspicuous and not really engaging in that and just getting on with the job.
And if you were in the House of Commons right now, if you were an MP, I'm sorry that you're not, Jacob, where would you place your vote?
I don't know. The great advantage of not being an MP is I don't have a vote at this stage, so I can watch and wait and see who emerges to the final round, which when people like me do have a vote. But I am fascinated that it's opened up so much. Kemi Bain not clearly ahead with the members.
Yes.
But has she got enough votes to get through to the members?
And how much will Tory MPs be willing to bet on Mrs Badenoch being the one who can beat Keir Starmer in 4 or 5 years' time? Because I think that is her major appeal, that she seems to cut through with people, with non-political people. But she's also, as we know, prone to speaking extremely plainly, and perhaps there is an aspect of fear and trepidation there.
She's got the potential to have a brand.
Yeah.
And MPs with a brand do push through. They have the Heineken effect. She's a little bit erratic. She's far too far to the right. But Robert Generic, I mean, he's suddenly tacked right of Genghis Khan. I can't get over what he's saying now. I thought he was Mr. Middle Lane. But, I mean, you'd get him on the boats and anyone would want to think he wanted to put a hole in them. And that's a totally unsavoury joke. And I rescind those comments given what happened yesterday. But, I mean, he really is a bit too far.
I interviewed him for GBNews last week. And it was very interesting why he has moved from being... because he saw in government that it just didn't work. He saw that government was failing and that it needed much more fundamental reform than he had believed when he'd gone into
picking on the boats?
No, not just that, but the inability of government to get things done.
But he has become single issue. Come on, let's be honest. If you ask
I think that's unfair to him.
I shouldn't say that's true at all. I think he's clearly rethought his political philosophy and realised that if you stand in the middle of the road all the time, you will get run down by both sides.
But what he says doesn't add up, because he says, on the one hand, got to stop the boats, got to leave the ECHR, and then on the other hand, he says, and we've got to make sure we prioritise the NHS. We all know that you have to staff the NHS by increasing immigration.
We haven't mentioned Tom Tugendhat much.
Well, I think that's because there isn't much to mention about him, really. In terms,
he's very impressive.
He's a decent performer at the dispatch box. I think he's intelligent.
Military career.
He's fairly affable, but I'm not really sure that he's someone to set the party alight with fervour to campaign for him. And this is what is needed. If the Conservative Party is going to take advantage of what I'm sure will be 4 or 5 years of absolute chaos under Labour, you need someone who's able to galvanise not only the people in the party to get out in the streets, but also, as Mrs Thatcher did in 79, 83 and 87...
He's got the energy.
Get people back into the voting box.
Vim and vigour. But now we're going to start talking about water in the desert. In a predictable socialist statement, the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has voiced frustration over the dynamic prices of Oasis tickets. Phillipson has indicated that the government may investigate the inflation of prices at peak demand, which has seen fans pay more than double the price they expected for standard tickets. The Prime Minister was asked about it at PMQs earlier today.
Last week, ticket-selling websites like Ticketmaster left millions of Oasis fans furious. This profiteering at fans' expense is not a one-off. The cooperative party's campaigning for a new licensing body with real teeth to tackle this online touting.
It is depressing to hear of price hikes. I'm committed to putting fans at the heart of music and end extortionate price resales, and we're starting a consultation to work out how best we can do this.
But why is the price of a ticket to a pop concert any business of the government? Surely it's a purely commercial transaction. Well, back to my panel. Tessa, you're young and trendy, and you're probably interested in going to Oasis concerts. But if they want to charge £100 or £500, that's a matter for them. What on earth has it got to do with the Prime Minister?
I love the idea that you still associate Oasis with being young and trendy. It means you're an old, dyed-in-the-wool lag if you want to go to an Oasis concert. Where's your Wonder Wallet, AJ? Perhaps you could afford to buy me a ticket as a birthday present.
I don't know.
I find it extraordinary that the intervention, the furore over this, when it is just a ticket to a pop concert, when we have constant price hiking around our travel. If, for example, Mrs Bloggs' mother-in-law has died and you need to get to a funeral or get to the bedside quickly, if you're buying for the next day, the prices have gone shooting up.
This is absolutely right. So the railways run dynamic pricing,
so
and the railways are run by the government, and that's all fine. But when it's a pop concert that nobody really has to go to, it's all outrageous and shocking. I mean, this is just cheap populist nonsense from Starmer.
I think the point is that it's very disheartening and feels dishonest when you go on a phone line and hold, probably at a fortune, because it'll be an 0800 number or something.
0800
and
numbers
the price,
are free, but never mind.
Are they? Well,
Yes.
there's ones that aren't. I got
There are ones that aren't,
I've now
yes,
had to
that's
put a
true.
cap on my phone. I keep on getting caught. Anyway, and you go on sitting thinking you're going to pay 150, and you get to the end of the line an hour or so later, and it's now 350. And I think that's where the immorality sets in.
It seems to me you either ration by queue or by price. And that if it's a pop concert, it makes much more sense to ration by price than by queue.
Well, precisely. And you just have to think of it like any other commodity in short supply. The price will rise the fewer tickets are available. It's like, for instance, if you're on the stock market and there's a great run on a stock, the price is going to rise because there is a perception that this is something of value and therefore you should pay a bit more for it. It is absolutely trivial. It is not a matter for government to be involved with at all. The fact that it was taken up at Prime Minister's Questions Time, if I were the Speaker, I should have struck whoever it was off the day's order paper, because this is simply not something about which the Prime Minister needs to express a public opinion. I think it shows that actually he holds the voters in rather low esteem, that they should need the Prime Minister to talk about this, rather than being able to decide for themselves whether they wish to spend the hours on the phone and the money at the end on a ticket to go see a pop band that is, yes, popular, but essentially 30 years ago's news.
But this is about jumping on a bandwagon, isn't it? It's because everyone's got up in arms about it and it feels like they're sort of touching or finger on the pulsing at the moment and helping the common person. Champagne supernova draft or something. I'm sure we can keep going with the... I've put this into... I'm being very modern.
Oh, you are very modern, yes, you are very modern.
GTB, come on, help me. GPT, thank you very much. But
I didn't get your references, however.
Didn't you?
No.
That's because you've been singing too many hymns in church and
good,
not wailing along to Wonderwall in the shower when you were young.
Was Wonderwall an Oasis song?
I believe so.
Okay,
I can't believe that I know less about more about this.
I thought you got confused with Wonder Woman, so I was going. All right,
it's
but let's get back to dynamic pricing, because actually I think dynamic pricing is a good way for businesses to sell tickets, and it's much the fairest way. And actually, it takes ticket touts out. I don't object to ticket touts.
But I don't understand why that we have it in, for instance, baked into our public transport systems, where it endlessly favours those with extraordinarily dull lives and often very stable and well-paid jobs. And for those of us who, well, fly by the seat of our pants a little more often, we're always being slapped in the face with massively high prices because we don't happen to know what we're doing next Tuesday afternoon. And I think that could be looked at. But, of course, that wouldn't be a massive kind of headline-grabbing vote winner, so they haven't gone down that avenue.
Well, and also, the crucial point, the government's got some control over it when it's the railways. So when the government's got control, it does absolutely nothing. When it's none of its business, the Prime Minister has a view and he's got to express it to the nation.
Well, indeed, because it's very much easier for him to express a view on that than look at the mechanism of rail pricing. And I found it quite odd when Lisa Cundy was talking about this, that she seemed to suggest that it was somehow better that there be a secondary market, a black market in the tickets, people standing queuing outside the stadium to get those tickets, probably for vastly more than they would have paid if they just stuck with the process here.
Yes.
As though the Labour government was all in favour of ticket touting.
I have no objection to ticket touting. That is, again, it's a commercial decision. You buy a ticket and you may or may not be able to sell it.
But it seemed like a curious moral distinction for Ms Cundy to be drawing.
All right. Well, thank you to my panel. We now know that Oasis, in addition to being Water in the Desert, is also a popular music band. In a moment, yet more proof emerges that going woke leads to going broke. The National Trust is in trouble. Find out why shortly.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Labour government wants to introduce a legal right not to be bothered so that staff can ignore bosses' emails and texts and calls outside of normal office hours, including holidays. It's all part of Labour's election pledge to give everybody a right to switch off for the first time ever. Mutaz, do you ever turn your phone off?
I don't. If you want to work in a high-functioning job that pays well in the end, you have to keep your phone off. The workplace is competitive. If you work longer hours, you're more likely to get a promotion.
It depends what job you do. We work in news, the three of us. News goes on all the time. It would be ridiculous to think that we could ever leave our emails or a phone call alone, because we don't know what's about to happen next. But say you're working in a clerical job or a manual job, If it's absolutely 9 to 5 and your job is over by then, there's no reason why you should be contacted by your boss except in an emergency.
Is that because people nowadays that they want to they don't want to live to work, they want to work to live?
People are more relaxed about work. I'm able to come in here dressed like this. But when it comes to legislation, you've got to be careful because it leads to ridiculous situations. The Euros, when England was playing with Spain, one of the Spanish footballers was 17 years old. I think the Spanish FA had to pay a fine because in Germany, a 17-year-old shouldn't work after 8 p.m. or something like that.
Because with me now is the head of employment at Pickering Solicitors, Joanna Robson. Joanna, thanks for joining us. Is it a generational issue?
Yes, I think there is a generational issue. I think younger people, they generally want to make a really good impression. So sometimes you find the younger workforce are the ones that actually want to really put their mark out there and they really want to work longer hours. And that's going to, it's going to be difficult for younger people to, switch off.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We've been talking about Oasis and the Tory leadership. And the mailbogs have zoomed in. Andy says, when will you be announcing who you will be backing in the Tory leadership race? I'm not sure. One of the things about presenting this programme is I have to try and, to some extent, be balanced. I certainly won't do it before we're down to 2. And Jeff says, on a personal note, which of the leadership candidates' company do you enjoy most? Jeff, that's a really difficult question. I like a lot of them. I'm personally friendly with a number of them. And I think it's a bit invidious of me to say one, though there is one whom I'm probably a closer friend than the others. And James says, James, this is such a difficult question. You're meant to send in nice, easy mailmogs, but James says, Jacob, please name your top 3 favourite Oasis songs. I have no clue at all. I couldn't name a single. My producers just said to me, Champagne Charlie is my name, which no doubt very good. For months, we have reported on the top-down cultural communism being foisted upon the members of the National Trust. Surely it's no surprise that it has been revealed that the Trust has seen its membership plummet. Numbers have fallen 89,000 to 2.62 million in 2023-24, a rejection of the esoteric wokeness at the top of the organisation. Let me just remind you of some of the examples. Earlier this year, they replaced the term ethnic minority with global majority to describe people who are not white. A volunteers' calendar excluded Christmas and Easter, but included festivals from other religions such as Diwali and Eid. Well, I'm joined now by the great Zuditu Gebrionis, senior researcher at the Legatum Institute, which is incidentally owned by some of GB News' investors. Thank you very much for coming in. You've been campaigning about this for some time.
Yes.
And the National Trust is pretty much a law unto itself, isn't it? It banned people from coming to its AGM last year.
Yes, it did. And the funniest thing, actually, about that was I was one of the few hundred people who were turned away from attending the AGM, ostensibly because there weren't enough places. The National Trust management didn't mention that they deliberately chose small venues that wouldn't fit the amount of people who wanted to attend. But one of the strangest things on, reading the newly released annual report was that in there it said that only that under 300 National Trust members attended the AGM last year, when they had said that they had seating capacity for 590 people, which means that surely it was completely illegitimate to turn away hundreds of members before the AGM happened.
Well, it's pretty undemocratic for a membership-owned organisation to refuse its members attendance, and a public company that had an AGM would be expected to book a hall big enough for all the shareholders to turn up if they wanted to.
And it did used to in the past. I mean, in the 1970s and 80s, it was booking very large venues like the Cardiff International Arena and places like that that would fit thousands of members. You know, at its peak, I think it was 2,500 members attending. So to only have 200 and something members attending only because people weren't, have been turned away is completely...
Does it effectively hold its members in contempt? It has all these woke views, which most of its members don't have. It offended its volunteers by making them wear rainbow lanyards. It's a bureaucracy that is unaccountable to anybody.
Yes, I think it does. It really does not respect its members in the way that it should. And the figures on falling membership figures really reflect that. And actually, it's higher than what you quoted earlier, because in last year's annual report, it was 2.72 million new members. This year, it's 2.62. So that's sort of, a reduction of 10,000. It's a reduction of 10,000, and overall member numbers, which back in 2020, it was 5.95 million. It was going down. It was 5.73 last year, but this year it's 5.38 million. That's quite a big drop.
But what about visitor numbers? It's still doing quite well in visitor numbers, is that right?
It's doing quite well in visitor numbers, but what the National Trust doesn't want people to know, so they've had a 5% increase in visitors over the last year, but that really is a convenient mask.
But that's pretty good.
It is good. I mean, it's good, but what they have failed to, acknowledge is that lots of people are leaving as members, but are still prepared to pay for, entry to these places, which are still wonderful, which do still have wonderful volunteers there. So it's not being against the institute.
But if people are still going,
yes,
does that mean that they don't care about all the woke stuff that the National Trust is doing?
No, because they're prepared to, because lots of people have been telling me, and we now see in the figures, lots of people have been saying, I want to show that, it's a vote with my feet sort of thing. It's quite sad because it does mean people have no say in, the elections and so on, but...
But you have no say in elections anyway, because they've got this ridiculous voting system where you're guided to vote for the people the National Trust recommends.
Exactly. That's perfectly true. Quick Vote has completely skewed the election results, and the National Trust has been doing very many anti-democratic tactics, such as from this year, no paper booklets being sent out to members. When members try and, ask the National Trust, why haven't I received my booklet yet? The National Trust is choosing not to reply, but it's made everything digital, which, as Age UK points out, is very anti the elderly population.
When a lot of members of the National Trust, and indeed people who have the time to visit National Trust properties, tend to be elderly.
Yes, and they're the least likely to be support these new agendas.
But what is your solution for this? Because you've campaigned to get people elected to the board, and they haven't won.
Yes.
You've highlighted the complaints in the media, and the National Trust has carried on regardless.
Yes.
Can they just carry on doing what they like? And as long as visitor numbers are going up, it's going to be very hard to hold them to account.
Well, there are two things. I mean, I don't really hold very much hope of the National Trust management internally making the changes necessary to bring about good governance and, accountability, which is really needed if we want such a huge charity to be run properly. But I would really expect the Charity Commission to step in and to realise that the National Trust is really pursuing a policy of managed decline, where it's allowing its properties to go into dereliction sometimes, while it promotes nature and climate change issues, basically at the expense of the built heritage, and is very deliberately shifting the agenda, focusing on getting funding for completely irrelevant projects.
But do you think a lot of people still love the National Trust and therefore they're willing to go along with this, and that they're not as exercised as you would like them to be?
Well, I think lots of members have tried to make their voice heard and are really shut down at every opportunity. You know, they try and the National Trust management shuts them down. The National Trust is looking to move completely away from having any physical AGMs, which is, I think, legitimate, and they're looking to move to just business-focused AGMs, where it's sort of just, this is what we're up to.
Thank you very much, you two. Up next, it's Martin Daubney. Martin, what is on your bill of fare this evening? You normally come before me, now you're after me. This is very confusing time shift.
Well, it's another transition, Jacob. Tonight, I'm asking, are the Refugees Welcome Brigade responsible for the continuing deaths in the Channel by rolling out the red carpet? Is it time for a youth crime national emergency? And Priti Patel loses out. Is anybody bothered? Finally, the Labour Party stay out of Oasis tickets. We've got Champagne Supernova, not Champagne Socialism.
Oh, very good. And not Champagne Charlie either. Well, that's coming up later. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'll be back tomorrow. The weather in Somerset, as you know, is beautiful, and there are some quite nice National Trust properties in Somerset. I'd go to Montacute if I were you.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. We're at the start of a pretty wet period across southern areas with a warning in force all the way through until the end of Friday. But it will remain quite dry, actually, across north and western areas. We've got high pressure starting to build in from the north and west. We will develop an easterly wind, however, so that's going to drag in some cloud across eastern areas of Scotland, northeastern England as well overnight tonight. Further north and west, though, staying dry and clear across Northern Ireland and western areas of Scotland, as well as some northwestern areas of Wales. Into the south, though, some outbreaks of very heavy rain starting to develop, and we do have that warning in force. So potentially a bit of a fresh start to the day across the northwestern areas of Scotland, but it's across the south with plenty of cloud around and outbreaks of heavy rain. We could see some travel disruption where we have got that warning in force. Not everywhere is going to see the rain all day, but where you do see it is likely to bring some surface water. Could be quite a murky start to the day across eastern areas of Scotland as well as northeastern England, but plenty of sunshine across Northern Ireland, the Western Highlands as well as the islands throughout Thursday, and it will feel quite warm in that sunshine with light winds. Much better weather than we've had lately across these areas, and in fact temperatures could climb higher than they have done since May by Friday across parts of the northwest. Very different story though in the south, with outbreaks of heavy rain developing, most likely to turn quite heavy across southwestern areas of England, South Wales as well. So pretty dull day across the south, but quite a big difference from the northwest. And a similar day to come on Friday. Further outbreaks of rain across the south, so we'd like to see further flooding issues and surface water. Easterly wind will continue to bring some cloud to the coast of the northeast, but it will burn back a little more, so there will be more in the way of sunshine on Friday, more widely in northern areas. Another fine day to come Saturday and Sunday in the north, with further outbreaks of heavy rain across southern areas. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is your chance to win a £36,000 secret salary in the latest Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash